I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of my downtown apartment, the city sprawling below like a glittering map of everything I'd built on my own. The silk blouse clung to my shoulders, soft against my skin, and the morning light reflected off my silver watch, catching just enough to remind me of time slipping forward, unyielding. My phone buzzed insistently on the marble countertop. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was him. My brother, Matthew. The same man who had cut me off from Dad's inheritance years ago, the one who had flaunted his victory like a trophy in front of the whole family. I hadn't answered his calls in months, not since I'd stopped letting him dictate my worth. But now the message stared at me. We need to talk. Urgent. A lump rose in my throat, familiar and bitter, the one I thought I'd swallowed long ago. I took a deep breath, smelling the faint roast of coffee lingering from my morning ritual, and let my fingers trace the smooth edge of my counter.
Pride. Pain.
Irony. It all collided in a single heartbeat. I'd spent years building a life where I didn't need his approval, yet here he was, a ghost from the past, daring to knock on the door I had slammed shut. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. Today wasn't about fear. It was about control, about remembering that the person he once underestimated was now fully, unapologetically me. I remember the day it all fell apart, like it was etched into my memory in sharp, unforgiving lines. I was 22, fresh out of college, full of dreams and hope, and utterly unprepared for the storm waiting at home. Dad had passed just weeks before, leaving behind a modest estate and a letter that would change everything. I thought inheritance would be shared fairly. After all, we were siblings. But Matthew had other ideas. He had a smug look on his face, the kind that made your skin crawl, as he waved the papers in front of me. "You don't need this, Emily," he said, voice smooth but laced with that quiet cruelty I had always hated. "I'll handle everything. You wouldn't understand." My hands shook as I reached for the papers. My heart thudded painfully against my chest, and a lump formed in my throat. I opened my mouth, trying to argue, to plead for fairness, but he cut me off with a smirk, the words dripping with arrogance. "It's done. You're out." Dad trusted me to make the right choice. I sank into the armchair, stunned, the room spinning slightly. The sting of betrayal burned hotter than I expected, the kind that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. I glanced at the small, gold locket Dad had given me the week before he died, his last gift, a token of his love. I held it tightly, letting its weight ground me. Grandma's voice echoed in my mind, soft but firm. "Emily, no one can define your worth but you. You have to fight your own battles, even when it feels impossible." I swallowed my tears and stood up, straightening my spine as if drawing strength from the very walls around me. That moment was a turning point. I realized then that Matthew's victory didn't have to be my defeat. I had a choice: crumble under the weight of betrayal or rise on my own. With trembling hands, I packed my essentials, left the family home, and stepped into the unknown. Fear mingled with resolve, but one thing was clear: I would survive. I would thrive. And someday, the world would see the woman I had become, not the little sister he thought he could break. Leaving home was terrifying, but I had something Matthew didn't: determination. The gold locket Dad had left me rested against my chest as a quiet reminder of my own worth, a talisman of courage. I found a small apartment downtown, modest but mine, with sunlight streaming through narrow windows in the morning and the faint hum of the city below. Every box I unpacked was a step toward reclaiming my life, every scrape and dent in the furniture a testament to starting fresh. The first months were grueling. I worked odd jobs, took internships where no one seemed to notice me, and learned lessons that college had never taught. Rejection became a rhythm I had to endure. I remember one night, curled up on the couch with a stack of unpaid invoices, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. Doubt whispered that I wasn't enough, that maybe Matthew had been right. But then I would touch the locket, close my eyes, and hear Grandma's voice. "You define your worth, Emily." One evening, at a local business networking event, I met Claire, a seasoned marketing strategist who immediately saw potential in me. Unlike Matthew, she didn't belittle or dismiss. She asked questions, listened, and believed. "You're too talented to hide," she said, handing me a business card with her personal number. That was the first door, small but crucial, opening into a world I had only dreamed of. I immersed myself in work, late nights blending into early mornings, studying trends, mastering negotiation, building relationships, and slowly, surely, turning every small opportunity into tangible progress. My first big client came unexpectedly, a boutique firm willing to trust my ideas. The thrill of seeing my strategies succeed, of signing contracts with my own name on them, was unlike anything I had felt before. Every small win added weight to my independence, each one quietly fueling my desire to keep my life separate from Matthew's shadow. Over time, I began investing, saving, and growing assets in ways no one at home would suspect. I kept my progress under wraps, posting modest updates online, never flaunting the life I was quietly building. The irony wasn't lost on me. Matthew had thought cutting me off would break me, but instead, it forced me to carve my own path. By the time I started to feel comfortable with my growing success, I realized I was no longer the girl he had underestimated. I was a woman with her own empire in the making, silent but powerful, unshakable, and unstoppable. The invitation was casual, almost too casual. Matthew had emailed me, insisting on a family discussion at the old estate, the very home I had left behind in silence and heartbreak. I smiled at the irony as I walked into the grand living room, heels clicking against the polished wood floors. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The expensive rugs, the crystal chandelier, and the family portraits lining the walls. But something was different. This time, I held the power, not fear. Matthew was the first to speak, smugness radiating from him like a shield. "I didn't think you'd show," he said, folding his arms, his eyes dancing with a triumph he had always worn like armor. "You always ran away when things got difficult." I let the silence linger, letting the weight of the moment sink in. I noticed Dad's old desk in the corner, the one Matthew had sat behind, believing it was his throne. My eyes softened as they landed on the locket I still wore beneath my blouse. Touching it lightly, I felt the pulse of every sacrifice, every late night, every rejection I had endured. I was no longer that 22-year-old girl. I was Emily, a woman who had forged her own empire from the ground up. Sacrifice, every late night, every rejection I had endured. I was no longer that 22-year-old girl. I was Emily, a woman who had forged her own empire from the ground up. I gestured toward the space around me, letting my gaze sweep over the room slowly, deliberately. "You know," I began, my voice calm but firm, "you've always enjoyed flaunting victories that weren't truly yours. But let me show you something you might not have expected." Matthew's confident smile faltered as I guided him and a few other family members toward the adjoining room. There, displayed on sleek shelves and polished tables, were certificates, awards, and framed contracts with logos of companies he had never heard of. Behind a glass cabinet sat my laptop, open to a financial dashboard that glimmered with numbers Matthew could barely comprehend, numbers representing investments, businesses, and ownerships that had all come from my effort, my sweat, and my vision. "You see," I said, turning to face him, "this is what happens when you underestimate someone and try to erase them. All of this," I gestured to the office, "is mine. Every single venture, every client, every achievement. And I've built it without your approval, without your help, without any handouts." The room went still. Matthew's jaw tightened. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stepped closer, as if proximity alone could uncover a hidden trick. But there was none. The truth was clear. The sister he had tried to erase was not only surviving, she was thriving, powerful, and untouchable. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat longer, letting the weight of every word sink in. Then, almost gently, I added, "And by the way, Dad always had a way of leaving surprises for those who thought they had already won." Matthew's expression shifted from smug to shocked to guilt, the layers peeling off one by one. No words came, only the heavy realization that the little sister he had dismissed had become the woman he could never control. And for the first time, I felt the thrill of justice, not cruelly but beautifully, quietly, and absolutely deserved. Matthew's face was still pale, the cocky confidence he had carried for years stripped away by the weight of reality. I could see the conflict flickering in his eyes. The same brother who had once tried to control me now realizing I held the reins. But I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to set the terms, to create a future that honored my journey and demanded accountability. I took a slow breath, letting the calm I had cultivated over years of struggle fill the room. "You want to be part of my life again?" I asked, voice steady. "Then there are conditions, rules for anyone who wants to be near me, or my work, or my future." Matthew swallowed hard, nodding hesitantly. "First," I began, "you have to acknowledge your mistakes, not just apologize, but truly understand the impact of your actions. No excuses, no blaming others. You deliberately tried to erase me, and that has consequences." His jaw tightened, but he remained silent. I pressed on. "Second, any family member who wants to be in my life must commit to growth. Toxic habits, greed, arrogance, they stay behind the door. This isn't a punishment, it's a chance to evolve. If you want my support, you must earn it, not expect it as a birthright." I paused, letting my words hang. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. I could see Matthew reflecting, struggling, and I felt a pang of something unexpected. Hope. Even for him, there was a chance for change. "Third," I continued, my tone softer but firm, "you must pursue your own dreams, not live through mine or compete with me out of jealousy. I will never interfere with your path, but I will not tolerate manipulation or entitlement. If you want to celebrate life together, do so as equals, not as conqueror and defeated." Matthew's shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time, I noticed a glimmer of respect. It was tentative, fragile, but it was there. He nodded again, and I could feel the shift. The power had finally balanced. I wasn't bitter, I was wise. I wasn't angry, I was deliberate. Finally, I added the last condition with a small, almost imperceptible smile. "And remember the locket Dad gave me? Keep it as a reminder that life has a way of surprising those who think they've won. He always left space for redemption, and so do I. But it's earned, not given." Matthew's eyes softened, guilt mingling with understanding. He stepped back, no longer flaunting confidence, no longer mocking or sneering. The dynamic had changed. I had the power, yes, but more importantly, I had established respect, boundaries, and a roadmap for reconciliation that honored both my journey and their potential to grow. For the first time, I felt an extraordinary sense of calm. Control was no longer about revenge. It was about clarity, wisdom, and shaping the relationships I wanted. And finally, the past felt like a memory I could revisit without pain, only lessons. Weeks passed after the confrontation, and slowly, I began to see changes. Matthew didn't transform overnight, of course, but he started taking responsibility in ways he never had before, managing his own finances, pursuing his work with integrity, and, most surprisingly, reaching out to others he had hurt. It was tentative at first, almost awkward, but it was progress. Family dinners, once tense and awkward, began to feel lighter. Conversations were no longer dominated by comparison or competition. I watched, quietly proud, as small but meaningful gestures unfolded, an apology here, an acknowledgement there. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time, I realized that my success had not only empowered me, but also opened a door for them to grow. I often returned to the gold locket Dad had given me, holding it between my fingers as I reflected on the journey. It was more than a keepsake. It was a symbol of resilience, of lessons learned, of the quiet strength that had carried me through betrayal and doubt. Each time I looked at it, I remembered Grandma's words, "You define your worth, Emily." And I had. In ways I never imagined, in ways Matthew could never take away. Sitting in my apartment one evening, the city lights flickering below, I smiled to myself. I was no longer the little sister who had been cut off, dismissed, or underestimated. I was a woman who had faced pain, embraced independence, and emerged stronger, wiser, and fully in control of her life. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. I had chosen the person I wanted to be, and every decision, every sacrifice had brought me here. And in that quiet, victorious moment, I knew something fundamental. Power isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life, setting boundaries, and giving yourself the freedom to flourish. Matthew and the rest of the family would find their way, but my path was my own. I touched the locket one last time, a smile tugging at my lips, and whispered to no one but myself. I am enough. I am strong. And I am free. Bottom of form.